I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Is parenting an abuse of power? Everything Voluntary Jack, on whom I did an episode called The Dogma of Atheism, sent me an invitation. He wrote, "Hi, Teresa. As a person, woman, and mother, I hope you will join our Free Friends Forum on Parentarchy. Check my new post with that title, Mothers Especially Welcomed." His post was subtitled, Parental Power. The elephant in the womb is the government in the tomb. Statism starts at home. Worldwide, the authoritarian right to own and control children is what legitimizes the authoritarian right for governments to treat its populations as children, slaves, pets. Let's get into this. And for the occasion, I have brought out my lovely print of a Pátzcuaro elephant in the womb. After reading Jack's post, I commented, "Hi, Jack. I have some questions for your forum. Who should have authority over the person who takes primary responsibility for a child? My rule of thumb is that authority and responsibility should always go together. But this seems to imply that there's a body of authority that should be over parents, that would take no direct responsibility for the children, but would set the rules for how parents needed to parent. And what would be the punishment to parents who didn't obey this authority? Would their children be taken from them, given to strangers who are paid by you as a taxpayer? Would you send them to parent reform school before they could get them back?" As a related aside, my reader Guy tells me that the term rule of thumb derived from the law that said a man couldn't beat his wife with any lash more narrow than his thumb. That answers the question, I think, of who has been given authority over the person taking primary responsibility for a child. And if the child is an oldest son, he has authority over the mother in primogeniture. Women were allowed to wear veils to show they were owned by a father, brother, or husband. Women without a veil could be raped at will, and wearing a veil without a male owner made a woman subject to being stoned to death. I grew up in an era of spanking and corporal punishment, which was inflicted by fathers in the home and nuns in the school. The trope was, wait until your father gets home. So parentarchy is really an oxymoron. Archy comes from archons, or rulers, who could only be male. The paterfamilias had complete power over wives, children, servants, and slaves. In looking up which gender commits more child abuse, I first found the counterintuitive stat that it was women. And then I found this site that looks at that statistic, and that's the Liz Library. It states 90% of all children who are in the care of one caregiver are in the actual physical care of a woman, parent, grandparent, teacher, babysitter, daycare provider, nurse, etc., and that 10% are in the care of a man. And that is a conservative estimate. It then adjusts the statistics based on that and eliminating instances in the care of a couple in which the woman would be charged with failure to protect. The result is that a child in the care of a man is astronomically more likely to be the victim of abuse than in the care of a woman, when looking at active violence rather than minor instances of neglect where no actual harm occurred. If your objective is to reduce the amount of physical pain inflicted on children, the best thing you can do is enable mothers to securely care for their children without the need to depend on a man, or even more importantly, be forced to share custody without being present. Children belong to and with their mothers. Forcibly taking them away through adoption, custody, or mandatory employment inflicts the lifelong trauma of abandonment on an infant. If the child's well-being is your concern, protect the bond with the mother. And I would add here that I think that women who have a good man who is taking care of their kids is not being forced to leave them in that parent's custody. That it is only when women are being forced to do that that I see there being that abuse in the situations that I've seen. In his reply, Jack stated, "Parentarchy is a very much needed new word to make visible the destruction, systemic, taken for granted power of parents over their offspring, so that society at large will condemn such abuse of power as immoral and the main cause of human violence in the world. Parentarchy, like feminist patriarchy, is meant to make morally visible to society what is, unfortunately, still far too ubiquitously invisible: the largely unconscious self-justification of parents granting themselves the moral right to treat their children as slaves and pets, e.g., to be morally justified to use first physical force upon their children as punishment, which is under the voluntarious non-aggression principle immoral and criminal." And I think we should all aspire to be treated as pets, really. I tried to imagine who was going to take responsibility for these newly emancipated toddlers who should be respected as an equal when they say no. But Jack kept going back to spanking, as if any use of power was the same as physical violence. I wrote, "You know, right? We agree that every child is born with bodily sovereignty, and to not have violations of the body is the most fundamental human right. I don't think this is controversial in terms of corporal punishment in the U.S. Any parent who smacked their kid in public would be put on social media and vilified. Public opinion is overwhelmingly against spanking in the U.S. It's not, however, criminalized, as you were saying it should be, putting the state between the parent and the child. I believe the only legitimate role of the state is to protect the sovereignty of communities. The only legitimate role of community governance is to protect the sovereignty of families. And the legitimate role of the father is to protect the mother so that she can protect the children. That's my definition of tonic masculinity. If the state is entrusted with protecting the child from the mother, you've given up all sovereignty in favor of an authority who you say cares more about the child than the mother. And archy isn't just rule. It comes from the all-male body of rulers with a precise inheritance order. Matriarchy is a reactionary word to patriarchy, which has been the law in Western civilization up until my generation. Mine is the first in which women are not fully dependent on a man in order to raise children. Instead, they've been forced to serve investor profits, just like men, and raise their children in their spare time. I don't see that as progress, and I don't consider myself a feminist. I did attend what was billed as a forum, but turned out to be 3 men, one of whom didn't have kids, and myself. It was really a presentation, a lecture, in which Jack went through his post, and I think this might be what he does for a living. And he would ask leading questions like, do you agree with Thomas Sawes that the lower a person's self-esteem, the greater will be their desire to have control over others? Now, for anyone who studied neuro-linguistic programming, that will be familiar as a trick, that the implication is that as a parent, if you're trying to control your kids, you must have a self-esteem problem. So I asked Jack to define the question that we were there to debate, if it was a forum. And he wanted to go back to the Thomas Sawes question. I said, well, can you define parentarchy? And he said, let me give you an example. And I said, no, I don't want an example. What I want is a definition. And it went downhill from there. Today, Jack sent me a note. Hi, Teresa. I am sorry you were offended by the polite challenge Leonard posed for you. I transcribed the conversation below. I hope you will consider a fourth way to interact with children, reason and negotiation, rather than only your 3 behavioral-focused punishment and rewards ways. Parent effectiveness training can show you tested, successful 4th ways to raise more responsibly free younger ones without the use of bribes, threats, or manipulation. I especially hope you will read Alfie Kohn on rewards as punishments. And I hope you will abandon the state as an immoral means to achieve any end as it transgresses the non-aggression principle. Then he quotes Teresa, "The goal in the end is for them to do the thing that I want them to do because I care about them." That is taken out of context. He writes, "As the sentence from the transcription shows, you are authoritarian, defined as you just want to be obeyed, and believe that domination is moral for humans as parents, so long as it serves what you consider a good end. This is the immoral justification used by all who want to control others rather than themselves. This is the usual, I am bribing, threatening, manipulating, beating, etc. you for your own good, or this hurts me more than you. For me, you are an example of the elephant in the womb. You cannot see parentarchy because you are it. Like the 2 young fish swimming in the water passed by the older fish who ask, 'How's the water today?' The younger fish ask each other, 'What's water?' You cannot see you are using parent power, which is the source of our troubled world, because you consider it morally justified and the only way to deal with younger persons, just as at one time historically almost all believed slavery was moral. We can do a Free Friends forum on parenting with you presenting your 3 and I and others presenting our 1, reason, negotiation. With interest and care, Jack." And I'll end from that forum with the transcription of the polite challenge from Leonard. Teresa, "So the 3 tools, once you eliminate physical violence, on which we're all in agreement, which is not even effective, what you're left with as a parent is bribes, threat, and manipulation." Leonard, I would just add one more option that you might have available, and that is reason. What you talked about, the problems that parents face, it's all real, right? But think about how you interact with a friend, an adult friend. Is it possible to act in the same way to a child with the same level of respect? Teresa, I can give you example of other parents whose kids, Leonard interrupts, I am not saying that it's an option because you were very adamant that there were only 3. That might be true for some people. They only see 3 options. Jack, most people can only see 3. Leonard, I would just offer that maybe there are other options that you may just not have come across yet. Teresa, so using reason to say, here's why you shouldn't run carrying your baby sister across the cement floor and saying, you could drop her, she could crack her head, she could die. I found that that kind of reasoning is too much for kids. That if I would say, and I'm just speaking from experience, if I would say, if you keep doing that, you're going to lose a point, which is my parenting program, my kids would just stop. Leonard, how about this? I give you an alternative scenario. If he, really she, runs across the concrete floor with a baby, she might die. What about if you redirected his energy and helped him learn how to hold a baby, how to control a baby, not run across a concrete floor? That's dangerous. But instead of denying the child because it's dangerous, and you have to, but you can still work with the intention. What was he trying to do? Have you ever asked that question? You don't know the motivation. It could have been a bad motivation or a good motivation. You don't know. But how about redirecting his energy? Hey, you're trying to lift your baby sister. You're so strong. How about I can teach you a better way? Now, this situation, is it a potential possibility depending on the child, their age and maturity? It's just a question. Teresa, this discussion is not respectful to me because what you're telling me is how to parent. Leonard, I'm not telling you anything. I'm asking questions. Teresa, I am a mother who has raised 3 daughters who are all successful, happy, and who are people who are great additions to the world and who are taking responsibility for themselves. And so for you to tell me how I should have parented, I need to go. I really need to go. Jack, can I say something before you go? Teresa, yeah? Jack, I think Leonard's trying to get to is what Alfie Kohn and Thomas Gordon try to get to for parents like you. There is a 4th alternative besides using threats, bribes, and manipulation. These are, to voluntarists, forms of punishments and rewards that we shouldn't be using with our children. And there is a 4th way that Leonard was suggesting, using negotiation, using reason, giving self-determination to our young ones, shaping the environment so it will be safe and they can learn about concrete dropping and everything else. We'd like you to consider that there's a 4th way. Would you consider that? Teresa, I will discuss it with my daughters and ask them whether they think that me using negotiation and reason would have been seen by them as a more sophisticated form of manipulation because the goal in the end is for them to do the thing that I want them to do because I care about them. That's the rest of the quote. Jack, and that's what is completely, I think, wrong with parenting your style, is that you just want them to obey you. And that's the kind of parenting we do not want in the world. Teresa, I want them to obey so that they're not harming themselves or thwarting themselves into less than they were born to be. Jack, right, and that's what the government says to all of their child slave citizens. I am just protecting you by putting you into jail. Here, Teresa leaves the Zoom. Okay, we've lost her. Leonard, you're right on. Leonard, it comes back to my original point. There's a definite divide in the world, and it comes down, as I see it, to authoritarian and non-authoritarian freedom. Jack, and voluntarism. Either you want to be self-authorized or you need to allow someone else who's superior to you to tell you what to do. And she is an example of this. Leonard, it's sort of in their DNA in a way. That's not to say you're locked in religiosity. Jack, I make that point. The family, clan, collective structure, evolutionarily speaking, is authoritarian to its core. You've got to be able to step out of it using reason, and it's difficult for people. I'm sure for the other parents I'm speaking to, I do not need to do a point-by-point critique of that. It is much more amusing to me than offensive because my daughters are 32, 30, and 26, and they're the people I most enjoy spending time with in the world. Unfortunately for me, so do a lot of other people. So when we get together for holidays, it's such a joy because everyone cooks, everyone cleans, and everyone analyzes each other when that person isn't in the room. This is because I raised them to take responsibility. The only legitimate use of power over someone else is to use it to give them eventual power for themselves. And my daughters all have power over themselves. They know how to take responsibility. They know how to take care of a home. They know how to hold down a job. They know how to keep their bodies healthy. They know how to keep their minds active. They know how to take responsibility in friendships and how to take care of other people. These are all things that they were not born with. And we as parents have that to do as a job. I remember being at my wit's end for the first 7 years of my daughter's lives. They tell you in the parenting books to have consequences that are logical to whatever it is that they're doing. How hard is that? I'm not willing to live with the logical consequences of Veronica running across a cement floor carrying Cassandra. That was something that she wouldn't have survived if something had happened, if she had tripped, if she had dropped her. Veronica's life would have been as marred as Cassandra's. You can't allow your kids to do things that could have permanent damage to themselves, to others, or to you. You also need to make sure that your kids are treating you with respect. This pendulum has swung so much the other way that I see parents who are saying, I need to make sure that my kids are not impeded in doing whatever they want. How do your kids get what they want? My kids got what they want by doing the things that I wanted. And that's how it should be. Let's explain my system a little bit more. So once physical force is taken off the table, as it should be, unless, like Jack, you equate taking away a kid's cell phone for the night with physical violence, then what you have left are bribes, threats, and manipulation. Manipulation, where you get a kid to think that it was their idea to do the thing that you want them to do, is far and away the best. But I cannot think that fast. It took everything in me to try to stay one step ahead of outthinking 3 daughters who are Machiavellian midgets. That's what kids are. They've got nothing better to do with those brains other than figure out how to get what they want without giving you what you want. What I developed was a system of bribes and threats. The bribes were always the same. It was 15 minutes approximately of something I wanted them to do, whether piano, saxophone, violin, workbook pages. When they got older, it was more things like listening to podcasts or doing things. What it couldn't be was chores that were their responsibility already, and it couldn't be anything to do with school because that was their responsibility. So it doesn't really matter. All it matters is that it's something that they're doing that you've defined them to be doing for you. And then the threat was always the same. The threat was always, I'm sorry, but if you do that, it's going to have to cost you a point. And I think that after the very beginning, the first couple months, it was rare that I ever took a point. I'm thinking of one of them spilling nail polish on the rug, and I think that was a couple of points. But other than that, the threat was always enough. But it had to be something they had put effort into that then could be taken away, that then they could earn again, so that it was never a big deal. It hurt, but it was replaceable. And the reason that it was never actually money in hand was because the rate was variable depending on what they spent it on. So if it was candy or just cash or toys, it might be $1 a point. If it was books or clothes or charity donations, it could go up to $10 a point. And so they wouldn't cash it out until they knew what they wanted. And that also gave the ability to take it back if there was something else that happened. And it also made it where when they wanted something, instead of convincing me why they needed it, they would say, can you give me a deal? And they would negotiate, but they would negotiate based on earning. All of my daughters say that when they have kids, they'll use the same system to raise them. When my middle daughter was in high school, I sent her to a counselor because we had a difficult relationship at that time. And the counselor decided that I was the problem because I was manipulative. And when she told her that, the other two sisters wanted to go in and talk to that counselor and explain to her why this system really worked, how they saw their friends who were never able to get the things that they wanted or even the things they needed, or who were given everything without doing anything to earn it, and how that affected all of their friends. There was a friend of mine who had a son at the same time that I had my middle daughter, and so the kids would play together, and when they got a little bit older, the son started biting and hitting and being very aggressive towards my girls. And at one time, I gave him a timeout, and he was fine with that until I took away the Barbie car, and then he got mad, and the mother decided that I was abusing him. What she would do is say, "Oh, look how you hurt her. Do you see how much pain she's in? Do you see what you did? We're going to have to go home now." And so the mother would punish herself because she would take herself away from a social situation that she was enjoying, and the kid would actually get what he wanted, which was to go home, and he'd get to be the center of attention, and he would be shown how much power he had and how much impact he'd had to make someone else feel pain. It was not effective, and I tried so hard to get this system across to her and say, if my kids had no consequences, they would do the exact same thing. It's not genetic. It's not because of your parenting. It's because there's just no consequences. But that wasn't something that ever came across, and so we just stopped being friends. One last story. There was a girl in Veronica's year whose parents taught those positive parenting programs that Jack apparently does. And this girl was someone we called the Grand Vizier because she did all the machinations behind the scenes to make sure that she was getting in with the right crowd and excluding others like Veronica, who she ridiculed about her weight, who she left out of different invitations. And Veronica would come home crying in 7th grade every day, and I'd be there reading Queen Bees and Wannabes as if my life depended on it. And one time at the beach, she got Veronica to say something mean about her other friend who was Native American and bigger than she was. And the friend overheard, and Veronica changed her life because of that. It made her decide she did not want to be a queen bee. She did not want to be a wannabe. She wanted to be with people who were kind. And so she started what I'd call the island of misfit toys. She took in all those band kids who were weird and nobody hung out with, and all the strays from every corner, and became the person who she is now. But that other girl, everyone who was a parent thought she was an angel. She was the perfect little, am I so sweet? I like to make everybody get along. And she learned every manipulative technique that you may have noticed Jack and Leonard both tried to use on me. And for more, here is a pre-Substack one on Be the Meanest Mom Ever. Your kids will thank you, eventually. And this one is the Great Displacement on Veronica's 32nd birthday party, along with all of her island of misfit toys. Thank you.